Hi everyone, it's Katie from the Central Caribbean Marine Institute here to answer some of your questions that we didn't get a chance to answer underwater yesterday during our live broadcast of Reefs Go Live. Now, there are a couple of questions yesterday that came in that didn't identify a school that you were with, so we're just going to answer all of those questions now in one video. And if you know whose questions they are, please feel free to tell them that we have answered them and we have posted them to our YouTube channel. So Miss Noelle Miles, you had quite a few students in your class who were asking questions. First one was, if somebody breaks off a coral, will it grow back? And the answer is absolutely. If somebody accidentally breaks a piece of coral, or if a branching coral accidentally breaks, it will actually heal over that spot like a wound, like you and I if we get a paper cut and it heals over eventually, or it will grow a whole new branch. So they're actually very resilient corals. Your next question was, how many corals are dying? And unfortunately, there are a lot of corals throughout the world and here in Cayman that are dying. We did a 20-year survey here in the Cayman Islands that showed the difference between 20 years ago and reefs today have about 4% less stony coral or hermatypic coral cover on our reefs. So we really need to be doing everything we can to make sure we're keeping these reefs nice and healthy. All right, some of your students had questions. Jamar wanted to know, what do corals eat? Well, if you remember from the broadcast yesterday, I talked about that symbiotic relationship between the zooxanthellae, or the microscopic algae living in those polyps, and that zooxanthellae takes in sunlight, converts it to energy into food for the coral. So that's about 90 to 95% of where their food comes from. Now, corals will also actually eat by using their tentacles of their polyps to reach out and grab food as it floats by or settles onto the coral as well. This can be anything from zooplankton or phytoplankton. Next question was from Tiana, and it was, how many inches can coral grow? Well, Tiana, branching corals like this, like what we have in our coral nursery, the stagcorn coral, or some of those branching finger corals we saw during yesterday's dive, grow about 8 to 10 centimeters a year. So that's about 3 to 5 inches a year. So that's about that much every year. We have some mounding corals or brain corals that we saw yesterday as well, and those only grow about 1 to 2 centimeters a year, or maybe a little bit less than 1 inch. Next question was from Lewis, and Lewis wanted to know, how does global warming affect our coral reef? Global warming is when the overall temperature of the atmosphere is slowly rising little bit by little bit, which eventually means the oceans are getting warmer little bit by little bit. And that's dangerous for coral reefs because coral reefs are already existing pretty close to their temperature threshold, or the maximum temperature they can thrive and survive in. So any warmer and it's really just going to be too hot for those corals, and we're probably going to see more disease, more coral bleaching, and maybe even some other negative effects on the reef as well. Tiana wants to know, how can the coral reef help us? Well, Tiana, we talked about the importance of coral reefs to humans a lot yesterday on our dive, so why don't you watch back that episode and see if you can answer this question yourself. Jamar wanted to know, what type of fish do sharks eat? Sharks eat all kinds of fishes. Sometimes they're eating small fishes, large fishes, bony fishes, invertebrates. They're eating all kinds of things out there. So I think it really depends on what is easiest for them to catch and what's closest when they're the most hungry. Kathleen wanted to know, how much garbage is in the coral now? Kathleen, I'm not really sure what you mean by that question, but if you're asking about how much garbage is in the ocean today as a whole, there have been a lot of statistics lately saying that by the year 2020, we're probably going to have more trash in the sea than we are fishes. So that's only a year away from now. Think about how much trash that must be if there's just as much as all the fish that we saw yesterday on our dive. That's a lot. And the last one from Miss Noelle Miles' school, Amy wanted to know how many corals are currently in the sea. Amy, I gotta tell you, I really don't know, but there are thousands upon millions of corals out there in the sea. And it may seem like, how can we ever not have corals when there are so many? But there are so many factors harming coral reefs these days that every single one of those millions or billions of corals really need our help to make sure they stick around for a while. All right, the next set of questions are going to be from Miss Daphne Ellis's class. And Miss Daphne had a Jason in your class who wanted to know, what is the shark's role in our ocean? A shark's role is very important. They sort of control the food chain and the food web from the top down. So as sharks are an apex predator on our coral reef ecosystem, they're responsible for keeping the next level of that food chain in check. Now, I don't want to say too much because we are going to have a whole Reefs Go Live episode on fabulous food chains and how sharks help with that, but you should know that they help maintain the balance of our oceans. The next question was from Dirk, and Dirk wants to know, what are some of the most important fish that live in the corals? Now, I would say, Dirk, that some of the most important fishes are the herbivores, things like parrotfishes, Bermuda chub, and butterfly fishes, because they are actually eating all of that algae off the coral reef, and that opens up and exposes the reef to new life, or for coral to settle on the reef and grow nice and big, which really is the providing structure for everything else on that coral reef. So I think the herbivores are maybe the most important fish, in my opinion, on this reef. And the last question from Miss Daphne's class was from Cameron, and you wanted to know, what is the rarest fish in the ocean? Cameron, I don't actually know what the rarest fish in the ocean is, but I will say there are lots of fish that are you would be considered very lucky if you ever saw them. For instance, here in the Cayman Islands, we don't get a lot of larger charismatic megafauna, things like dolphins and whales and sharks. We don't get a lot of them. So if we ever see a really big fish, like a really big grouper or a dolphin or a whale, that's a pretty incredible day. So I would say that's one of the rarer ones for us here locally in the Cayman Islands. Now, the last couple questions came to us from Miss Nicole Poirier's class, and her class wanted to know, what are the negative impacts of anchoring boats? Are those anchors destroying the reef, and are there any public messages out there to stop these practices from happening? Now, Miss Nicole, that's an excellent question, and I will say that anchoring of boats on the coral reef is negatively impacting them. If that anchor falls onto a reef, it can shatter those corals, it can break them up, or it can create a really nasty scarring on those corals, which, as we learned yesterday in our broadcast, takes years, sometimes even hundreds of years to form. So you've ruined potentially hundreds of years of growth on that coral reef. There is public knowledge or handouts out there from CCMI where we talk about minimal contact on the reef, how we can minimize those impacts using the mooring ball system here within the Cayman Islands. We have 365 beautiful dive sites that have a mooring ball. By using those mooring balls and not throwing out an anchor, you never even have the possibility of accidentally anchoring on the reef and destroying or hurting those corals or the coral reef as a whole. All right, those were all excellent questions from a variety of schools. Again, if anybody watching knows Miss Nicole Poirier, Miss Daphne Ellis, or Miss Noelle Miles, please make sure to tell them that we've answered their class's questions and to please come and dive with us again on April 11th for our next Reefs Go Live. Until then, we hope you guys are studying hard in class and that you'll be my dive buddies again soon. So take care and we'll see you soon.